All right, so this session is actually just something that I came up with as I heard a lot of people, you're always thinking about Power BI Desktop as a reporting tool. I actually found that I'd been using it a lot actually as a data modeling tool as well, especially when I was first trying to sell what we were going to build within Power BI at my company. So that's kind of where this whole session was brought from. So we'll kind of walk through some of this stuff. You've probably seen this slide at least 10, 20 times during the last 3 days, but silence your cell phones. Otherwise, we all get to join in on the call. And then, information about PASS. So if you've been a longtime PASS person, you'll know that there's all kinds of stuff other than Summit that we have to offer. You can do SQL Saturdays that are usually all around the world, not just on Saturdays too, I might point out. Sometimes they are on different days of the week, but we do call them SQL Saturdays that are free. And then there's all the other virtual groups and local groups that you can attend as well when you get back home to wherever you're going. There's usually stuff going around all over the world. So there's a little about me. Been doing BI in kind of all different forms, including mainframe reporting way back in the day when I first got out of college. So a little over 20 years of experience so far. Been using the Microsoft stack, starting with SSRS as soon as SSRS was out, which is about 2002, is when I actually started working with it as an early product. It was really bad back then in 2002. It's gotten a heck of a lot better. Have not used it as much lately because I've been focused mainly on Power BI, but now that Power BI supports paginated reports as well, which is basically the same technology that SSRS had, I'm actually looking forward to getting back into using a little bit more of my SSRS skills as well. And then as well as that, I'm actually also a user group leader in Denver for the Power BI user group. So we have a Power BI focused user group that meets on the second Thursday of every month. So actually when I get back, it's actually the Thursday of next week that we have our meeting. So if you're ever in the Denver area around that time, look us up. It's just milehighpowerbi.com is the website. So check that out if you're interested in learning from other local Power BI people in the Denver area. So here's kind of our agenda for going through this session. I'm going to take a look at all the different data connections with Power BI, just so that everybody's kind of comfortable with the different ways you can connect to different data sets, so that you can all understand that and make sure that you are aware of the ins and outs of each of these types of connections and what it leads to as far as being able to do data modeling or not. So we'll go through all those and break it down. Then a little bit of a basics on data modeling. So if you've never actually done any kind of data modeling before, I'll give you some basics on that just so that you're aware. That's kind of one of the other things I found about, people and companies find Power BI Desktop and they just throw it out there and say, okay, start building reports. And a lot of these people, maybe don't have, never took a class on data modeling or data warehouse design and stuff like that, which is what the tool is built on. So this will help give you some foundations for being able to do that kind of stuff a little better. Then I'll do a little demo actually showing you how to do some prototyping and data modeling within desktop, a few tips and tricks at the end, and hopefully some time for Q&A as well. All right, so data connections. So there are 3 types, at least today, of data connections within Power BI Desktop. I'll go through the ones that basically won't allow you to do a heck of a lot of data modeling in Power BI Desktop off the top here. First of those being live connections. So the live connections are the ones where you're actually connecting to anything that's already a model, basically, a multidimensional model or a tabular model already defined on the back end. So in that case, it's analysis services tabular, which can be either on-prem or in Azure, is what that would be. And then you've got the analysis services multidimensional, which right now is only available on-prem. And it's something that may eventually come to Azure. There's been rumors about it for years, so we'll see. And then there's the Power BI data sets, which is one of the newer ones that's been added as they implemented the XMLA endpoint. If you've heard that technology or that term thrown around, is something where you have the ability to actually talk to the data sets in Power BI just like as if they were another analysis services tabular model, which is really what they are on the back end. It's just shown in that tabular mode is how Power BI represents it. So those can actually be connected to through this live connection as well. And I'll show you what those look, when you connect to those, they look a little different in desktop, and that's why I was saying you can't really model on those. So direct query is another connection technology, and this is where all the relational databases, this is how you connect to them within Power BI desktop. If you want to, you can connect to them as direct query. And this is, again, a situation where you're doing an actual query directly to those database sources, and you're not actually storing any of the data inside the Power BI report file itself or in that model that gets built within the report file. It's a way of making sure you're always having the most up-to-date data if you have the capability to do that. It is quite a long list of products that actually support that. When you go into the Get Data option within Power BI Desktop, there's a list of tons of them that actually support direct query. So I'm not going to put them all up here, but there is a hyperlink there that gives you that full list of which ones support direct query today. And all these slides and everything are already up on the past website as well, so make sure to check those out. The other thing I'll bring up with direct query, something specifically that we've run into with the technologies we're using, if you do use some third-party connections, even if they're in Azure, like Snowflake, there's a third-party database called Snowflake that runs in Azure. If you're going to connect to that directly with your Power BI reports, you actually will be required to have an on-premises data gateway set up with that ODBC driver, because that connection to Snowflake in that instance is ODBC only at this point in time. So you actually, even though it's in Azure, you're actually querying from Power BI in Azure back to your on-premises gateway, wherever that might live, and in out to Snowflake and back around. So not the greatest of solutions, but that is something that is the only way really that Microsoft can support that type of connection today if it's using ODBC. Hopefully, in the near term here, they'll get a direct connect. I know they're working on it for Snowflake and other technologies, but just be aware that if it's something you see on a list that's not working right, it could be because you need to install the drivers on a gateway to actually make it work within your company. And then the third type of connection is import connection. So this is the most common. It's the default for almost all the connectors that you go to set up within Power BI Desktop, that actually, when you go to point it towards whatever that data is, it's actually pulling a copy of that data and storing it inside the report file in that model. So that's something to keep in mind too, as I've talked to some people here at the conference. Their company's a bit concerned about data, being up in the cloud and stuff like that, and that's, I mentioned that, if they're worried about that being stored inside the report file, that's something to look for. If you do the import connection, you're actually storing that data inside that report file, so that could actually be a security concern. So make sure you're aware of that, or that your company is aware of that, so that you don't do something you're not supposed to from a security perspective. The other danger with, or not necessarily a danger, but the other thing to keep in mind with import data is that you do have to refresh it on a regular basis. So the data that's pulled into that report file would actually have to be refreshed on a regular basis to keep it up to date with whatever the source data is. So that's another thing to keep in mind. There is the capability in Power BI, once you've deployed it to the server or the service, that you can actually go and schedule refreshes like that. So that's something that you can do as well if you don't want to do it manually. And you can combine data from a whole bunch of different sources with import. That's the kind of the power of the import for kind of an ad hoc reporting type setup that people really like, is that you can actually make it where the file actually connects to a whole bunch of different data sets, some from the web, some from an Excel file, some from all kinds of other sources that you can connect to in Power BI, and then kind of merge them all together. And that's where the data modeling I'll talk about kind of comes into play. If you're going to do it inside Power BI Desktop, you would almost have to use import connections to do that. There is kind of a change going on where there is the capability of doing dual mode on some tables now, where it can be direct query and import at the same time, and then there's the capability of doing combinations of these different connection technologies. But right now you can only mix import and direct query. You can't mix it with live query. Once you've set up a live connection that I talked about as the first one, you're locked into that selection for that entire report file. You won't be allowed to actually pull in any other sources into that report for that particular file. All right, so just a quick thing on doing a demo here. So I've got some stuff set up already. I kind of, did the typical cook show thing where I pre-bake some of this. So I put all these hyperlinks out there to kind of show you exactly where this data comes from. So like I said, download the slides and the demo file, and you'll actually get these as well. So the actual demo that I have set up in Power BI is just a fairly simple file here, but I'll kind of show you exactly how the get data experience actually works within the desktop. So you'll notice I press the get data button, and then what you get is a dialog of all these different, my Zoom is going crazy. There we go, lock it, okay. So yeah, this is all the different sources that it supports, out of the box. I can't show them all in a locked, zoomed in screenshot here, but you can kind of see that you've got your Excel, your text, some of those kind of things. You've actually even got a folder data type, which is kind of nice if you want to actually pull in all the files within a given folder. It walks you through how to set that up. And of course, you've got the traditional stuff with SQL Server. You actually even have Access, so if you're looking to pull stuff out of Access, it's available as well. And then there's tons and tons of other sources. So as you scroll through this list, you'll find, and this list is changing too on a fairly regular basis. So if something that you're looking for isn't there today, it might actually be added sometime in the future, since they do update this product every month. But you can kind of see how there's tons and tons of different capabilities for different things it supports. It helps here to actually, if you know exactly what you're looking for, just type it into the search box. Otherwise, you can go into these categories where they break it down a little smaller. You can look at files, what are the databases they talk to. So here you can see like Amazon Redshift, there's Snowflake there as well. And then there's just the Azure sources as well, and then some stuff actually fits into the other. But one of the things I'm going to show that I did is I was using actually this web connector. So the interesting thing about the web connector in Power BI Desktop, and they've changed this quite a bit actually from what it was originally, is that you can actually just point it towards a website that you might have set up. So I could actually go back to, let's go to one of these links that I actually have here in the page. Some of these point to data sets. Yeah, I think that one's actually data set. Let me go to one that's a Wikipedia, because those are kind of the cool web ones to show. So you can actually go to any website like Wikipedia that has these tables. So anytime you see these kind of web tables, you can actually point Power BI Desktop at those just by copying the hyperlink and going back in and just pasting that hyperlink right into the page. And then what it will do is actually read that page, find out where the tables of data actually are, allow you to choose those, and now it's become a lot more graphical as far as how it does those different connections, which is kind of cool. Previously, you just kind of had to know where the tables were, and it wasn't as easy to navigate. But here you can see it's showing that there's a table there of different things. This is a table of data. So over on the right, it's actually showing us each of those tables of data. And actually, I was looking for this top one is the one I'm looking for. So if you want to actually see what it looks like in a web page, it'll show it with it highlighted as well. But the table view is usually good enough that you can kind of get an idea of what you're looking at. So if you find the table you're looking for, you just go and you click the little checkbox that's what you want to pull, and then you say load that data in. So then that'll just pull that table in. It's now tied to that website, to that actual table in that website. So as I said, you would have to refresh this to keep it up to date. The other challenge you may run into is if that Wikipedia table changes over time. They add a column, remove a column, stuff like that. You may have to come in here and rework some of your queries within your data, or just reset it up. Might be the easy way to go do it if it's a real simple table. But yeah, you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're pulling stuff off the live web, is that it's not always going to be so easy to get to. And then once you've got them all set up within your system through the Get Data, you can actually come into the Edit Queries option. And it's saying it's having problems with some of the, and this is where exactly what I was talking about. So this particular table that I hit as a source apparently has now changed within Wikipedia. I can try to do a refresh and see if it finds it again. But it's possible that some of the data actually changed. It looks like it's not an issue with that. It's an issue with, yeah, they've since changed a table or a column in that table since the last time I pulled this, where they no longer have that column about 2017 data is no longer there. So I would have to figure out, okay, what do I need to do to fix this particular step within my query in Power BI to actually clean it up. I'm not going to step through all that stuff right now, but just know that you can easily remove steps within Power BI, the query editor, if you need to. I actually want to keep that because the nice thing about some of these steps, like remove top rows, actually got rid of some of those explanations and junk that was at the top. And then I went through and actually did a remove duplicates as well, which it looks like it's having trouble with that as well. So you can do whatever you need to do to clean it up, and it's all repeatable. It's saving all those steps in here. This is the great thing about Power BI, or Power Query is what this is called, if you've heard that thrown around, is that it's an actual language on the back end. So you're seeing the graphical part of it here, but if you go into they have the advanced editor actually set up so that you can actually come in here into the advanced editor. And this is actually where you can actually see the real M code that's running behind the scenes to do what all those graphical pieces within the editor are actually setting up. So a nice way to actually learn the language is actually to go in there and open that advanced editor up so you can actually see how M works, and then you'll be able to learn the language. I don't think I would ever, as being even a coder who's learned a lot of languages, I have not made an effort to actually sit there and learn Power Query enough that I could actually just bang it out inside of a query editor. To me, it's not the type of language that looks like it would work really well that way, but if you're really good at learning that kind of stuff, you certainly can do it that way. I just know enough of being able to copy lines and paste lines. You have to watch out for little stuff within M with the commas that tell it that there's another line basically after that and stuff. So there's a lot of little syntax things that once you learn those, you can start doing a lot of stuff. But there are many more commands that you can do with Power Query that are not represented at all within this UI. So there are things that you can do with the language that they have not yet put any kind of a shortcut to with these buttons and stuff that show up in all these various menu items. So just know that that is a language you can actually learn the same as any other language like C++, C#, all those languages. But I as myself, have not gone through to spend time to learn that so far. But I'll show you that there's some other sources that I'm pulling. This one actually as well is a website. Pulling in just a state list, but I think, yeah, this one is actually pulling in a CSV file, which in this case, because when I built this report, and this will be the same problem you'll have if you go download this zip file and put it on your local computer, the actual files won't be in exactly the same location as when I built it, because of course it's in you'll notice it's in a location with a user's folder for me. And that's the problem I'm having actually on this computer, because I built this probably on my work computer at the time. So if you want to make these actually work, the zip file does contain all of these files that are referenced in here. So you'll just have to click the browse, and then it'll go out. In this case, it found pretty quickly because I was in this folder, this subfolder that has all those extracted files. Just click that, and now we're we're back up and running with the data that's in that file. So now it knows where it's at for that particular file and can actually go through all the steps to transform that data, clean it up, make it look more easier for your users to get into. You can change column names, you can change column types, flag them for, get rid of them completely if they're not needed. That's kind of one of the things that I talk about a lot with data modeling is if there's a whole bunch of columns in here that you're never going to use, you can just remove them here within Power Query, so it's not even an issue anymore. Same thing for this colleges file. It's going to complain about it, that it's located in a place where it can't find it. If I click the browse again, there it is. I just point it to it, say, okay, now it's back, and that all works. So the background of this data, that I was just looking for something that was great for demo purposes, is that I pulled all the states, their populations, off of those Wikipedia pages, and then I went out to the government data.gov website, pulled down all the colleges within the US, and then just made a simple setup so that you can actually see what colleges are in what states, and then thankfully that data.gov actually has the address of each of those colleges, so you can actually then plot them all onto a map. So that was kind of the basic idea of the data I pulled, just so that you kind of get an idea of what it looks like when you build all that stuff within Power BI Desktop. Any questions about setting up data connections and new data sources within Power BI Desktop? It's actually probably the easiest thing to do within Power BI, thankfully. But then from there, it gets fairly complex pretty quickly. All right, so from there, we will switch back and go through a little bit more stuff actually on data modeling. Oh, you're seeing my nice screen desktop. It's working. It's spinning. Come on, PowerPoint. Oh, it had to relaunch. Wow, I crashed PowerPoint. All right. Nice. We'll see if it launches this time. There we go. That's better. Demos, I tell you. Always good. All right, so with that, we will move into talking a little bit more about data modeling and some of the things you should keep in mind as you're actually building out this stuff. Like you saw, I was just pulling in a whole bunch of stuff I know I need data-wise. Now you need to actually figure out how does this data all relate to each other. So that's kind of what data modeling is. Some of you have probably gone through a lot of this, but just to give you kind of a refresher, or for those who have never done it, you'll hear references to star and Snowflake schemas. Know that the Snowflake schema I'm referencing here is different than the Snowflake database that I was talking about earlier, because that's a third-party database that just happened to take the name Snowflake from this idea, actually, of what they call a Snowflake schema within data warehousing, because that's really what the Snowflake product is. That database product is built on data warehousing. So just know that that's the difference in those terms. One's relating to a company name, product name, and the other's an actual description of a type of data warehousing layout. So with those two different types of technologies, they both share a lot of things in common. The biggest thing being what you call the different pieces of your model. There are tables within your model that are called dimensions. Some of you may have heard that term thrown around, or facts. The idea being that in both the star schema and the Snowflake is the stuff in the middle is kind of your fact tables, is the idea. And so those tables are the tables that basically all the other dimensions join into. So that has all of your numbers, your order count, your order amounts, all those type of numerical representations typically are in the fact tables that are at the middle of whatever your model is. And then the dimensions are just spread out on the outside, connecting to it basically to describe that data. So it allows you to slice your orders by what state they were ordered in, what different types of customers you have, any of those kind of descriptors that you want to put onto those and slice up your data. If you've heard of slice and dice, that's kind of where all that comes from back in the Excel pivot table days. is that you were basically using the different dimensions to actually describe that data or break it up. So you wanted to see your sales within a specific county of a specific state. That's not stored in the fact table. The fact table just says this order was bought by this customer, and then there's a customer table that actually is linked to it that then tells them what state, what county that particular customer lives in, so that you could actually do that kind of description of the data and slice it to those smaller amounts. The other main thing that you'll hear too is the term measures. That's what those numbers are, the account, the order amount, the order count, any of those kind of things that are stored in that fact table, those are what they call measures. So you'll see that even in Power BI, sometimes they'll have calculated measures that you could create. So they use that terminology to kind of indicate this is what those numbers represent. They're called measures. And then there's relationships between them, so that you can easily see between the dims and the facts here are those little lines. Those are the relationships that you're defining between the two different table types, so that when the report is actually built on top of it and you're pulling the different attributes from these tables into the report to report on it, it knows how to navigate from one table to the other within the actual model itself. It's not really a model until you've actually made relationships. Without any relationships, your data is just kind of floating out there with nothing being related to each other. So as you go to filter things, nothing's going to change because it doesn't know how to navigate between those different parts of the model. So it is important that you actually do set up the relationships. You can do relationships typically with the Microsoft technologies, and Power BI specifically support one-to-many. They don't really support the many-to-many. It's something that you can do through some different ways of doing things, but one-to-many is the typical relationship that's set up within Power BI. And you can see what indicates that. It's hard to see in this particular chart, but there's usually a number there that says like 1, and then there's an infinity symbol on the other side. So it's usually, that's what's indicating it's a one-to-many type relationship. I have a question?
What do you typically do when you're joining two tables and you have to basically join based on multiple columns? Do you
Right.
one column?
Okay, so he's asking about when you have to do a join between two tables, but you have to use multiple columns. So in Power BI, unfortunately, there's nothing built in to allow you to do. You can only do one relationship from a table to another in Power BI. So if you have to do multiple columns from one table to another, the way you do that within Power BI Desktop is actually, you could either do it in that query editor when you're actually building the tables and you've got that situation, combine those two columns into one column within the query editor, and then actually use that new column then as the joiner between the two tables. So you would have to create that combined key, and typically what we say when you do that is don't just throw them together in case they're numbers and stuff. I'll put like a pipe symbol between them. So use the DAX concatenate command to actually concatenate them together and put a pipe in between them, just so that you can, if it's text of different sizes and numbers of different sizes, at least the pipe allows you to actually see where the two parts came together. And you can do that for as many as you want. So if you need to use 3 columns, you need to use 4, whatever you need to do, just join them all together in the Power Query and use those pipes to separate them out. That's the easy way to do it.
Is there any kind of encoding to put them together and really improve the performance?
Any kind of encoding, like what?
Like in SQL Server you have, you can basically encode and create a hash value.
Oh, okay, so you're talking about, can you use like a hash value and stuff? Not by default within Power BI Desktop, but if you wanted to do a hash, you would probably, there's nothing in DAX or Power Query that'll generate a hash type. There's no capability to do that out of the box. So you would have to do that all on your own before you've pulled the data in, or somehow as you're building the query, build that in with it. Be the only way, unfortunately. All right, so that's kind of the intro to data modeling there. That's kind of your Data Modeling 101 class for today. So we'll kind of show how some of that looks within the Power BI desktop application as well. Once my mouse comes back, there we go. So we're going to close out of the editor. So when you're doing the relationships within Power BI, you're actually usually doing them all within the main Power BI desktop application. I am not going to apply those changes. So what you'll notice over here on the left, what's that? Oh, you're not seeing it. Jeez. It went out of duplicate when PowerPoint crashed. We will switch that back. Thanks for letting me know. Set it up for mirroring here. Bear with me. It looks like the resolution went back too. Fighting with resolution. Oh, come on, switch back. So it's not gonna, there we go. Okay, good. There, now it's back. All right, so yeah, we're back in Power BI Desktop now. We closed out of that query editor. This is that same data I had, but on the left side, you'll notice there are 3 different options here. So there's the top one, that's typically what you use to build reports. That's where all that option is. The second one, if it's available, depending on what types of data you've connected to, you can actually kind of browse through the actual data for all the data sources included in your report. And then the third one is actually where the modeling is. That's kind of what that symbol, I know it was kind of hard because my mouse was hovering over it, but that symbol is trying to show exactly what I was showing you with the relationships. It's just kind of showing things that are joined to each other through these relationships. So if you click on that, apply changes, just doesn't want to give up. Go away. My mouse is not cooperating. There we go. Come on. So yeah, what you get then is you get this new model view of the diagram. And in this case, I have set up, not all the tables are related to each other in this case, because I found that, for whatever reason, to get to what I needed to show this report, it only required relationships on 3 of the tables. I have a date table in here as well within the model, and I included that because this is kind of a cool little extra that kind of goes more back to the first part that I could have shown you. But that actual date table is a DAX, is actually just a dynamic DAX table, is the interesting thing about the date table. So it is actually built from all this DAX, and this came from Marco Russo and Alberto. If you've met or been in any of their sessions this week, they actually put this up there on their website on SQLBI.com. For anyone to use, but it's a really nice setup of custom DAX code that actually will generate a calendar table that you can use within your data warehouse. And I always recommend creating your own custom date dimension instead of actually just using the out-of-the-box ones, because the nice thing about ones like this one with this code is there's a lot of code in here that you can actually see where in this particular case, like we have a fiscal calendar that's different than a regular calendar within our company. So this script actually has the capability for you to say, I want it to be a 445 fiscal calendar, and it'll actually generate it that way within the code when it runs the stack. So lots of capabilities for actually making a very extended version of a date dimension, because as you can see here, there's a lot of columns of data, and it's basically because the way this is set up, it's breaking down all of the different fields so that you can do anything you think of as far as I want to see what the date is on the previous year, what the date is in the previous period, etc. Right. Yeah, exactly. So he's asking about, in this case, I did not set it up as a connection to any of the tables, only because that data I'm using doesn't have any dates on it. That's the only reason why. But I wanted to include the date dimension just to kind of show how it's easy to include even a custom DAX function to basically generate a table that you can then use in your models, which is kind of the reason for including it. But yeah, as far as how it's related, I have not related it to anything within this particular model, only because the data I pulled from the internet didn't have any dates, and it really didn't tie to anything. Sure.
I was just going to add on to that, if you go into file under options, Power BI will do implicit
Correct.
detection. There is the ability to turn it off.
Correct. Yeah, she's pointing out that there is an option, which, yeah, usually I don't like to have on as well, but there is in the options menu in Power BI, there's actually a couple options I'll show you based on what we've been going through. First one actually is the auto date time. So if you are going to, now all of a sudden the ad, there we go. If you are going to use something like that custom date time dimension, turn this off. The time intelligence auto date time for new files function is something that you'll need to turn off to make it so that it uses your date dimension and doesn't go out and create its own, because one of the things, if you watch Guy in a Cube, stuff like that, they actually show you how every single table you add on that has a date column in it, it's in the background going to create a date dimension of its own, basically, for each of those date fields. So you'll end up with a whole bunch of extra storage being tied up inside your Power BI report files that are actually because of it generating these auto date times. But the feature she was specifically referencing is actually in the, it's always data load. That's where it's at. So there's a whole bunch of features here about what's it going to do, when you do updates. Is it going to delete refreshes, auto-detect new relationships when it opens up the data? And again, down here, there's the auto-date time feature again. This is for the current file I'm sitting on as well. So you may have to turn that off if you've got a file that you've already built, you have a date dimension in it. Make sure you turn that feature off for the current file you're on. That other setting is a global setting, so that from then on, any new file you open within Power BI Desktop, it will not auto-create those date time tables for you. But yeah, if you're worried about it picking up relationships that it shouldn't with your data, then you want to make sure you watch these relationship options as well within the Power BI Desktop. Sometimes it does a really good job auto-detecting, sometimes not so well. I think it's gotten a lot better. When I was first playing with Power BI Desktop, I know I fought with it all the time because it would create relationships that weren't really relationships I wanted, which can cause you to get like really weird, inaccurate results when you're building out your reports. So you definitely need to watch those relationships. If we go back to that diagram view, it's easy enough to create any kind of relationships by right-clicking within the actual tables. You can actually go in and manage them or set up new ones by, the easiest way I like to actually create new ones is within the table view. You can actually, all this stuff is different than what I was expecting, probably because of how I connected to it, but the relationships, I think because I've already got them set up, this is the relationship creator as far as what it looks like to edit one. You're basically seeing how what I've done is for that particular data set, the college scoreboard data set, I said, here's my state column within it, and then on the states data, which is the data I pulled from Wikipedia, I want to use that column as the table that it joins to. And in this case, I use many-to-many. I know that's, or many-to-one in both directions. That's something that a lot of them will warn you not to do. This is, meant for prototyping and stuff, so it's just kind of to show how it works. Typically, when you went to production, you probably would not want to use a bi-directional relationship, but when you're prototyping stuff, it's kind of nice because then you can actually see if you put slicers and filters up on your report, as you're actually navigating stuff, it will reflect both. So as you're filtering on a specific state, it will, of course, filter the data, but then as you do stuff on the report, it also filters the filters. That's what a bidirectional relationship will do, but it's something that could cause bad results with the data if it's not, if you got a lot of very confusing relationships, or If you've got data that actually doesn't support that well, you can actually get bad results. So definitely watch out for doing two-way, but like I said, this is more just for this particular demo to show you how that works. All right, so yeah, in this case, we just set up two relationships. That's all that was really necessary to make this work. I just wanted to see the population and the states, and then this actual college scorecard to actually see what colleges are within each state. So that's kind of how that data model works. And then on top of that, I just started building an actual simple report in this case. As I mentioned, that is just a filter with a drop-down that shows what state, and then it's going to show me the count of colleges within that state, and then next to it, it actually has a nice map that shows you where those colleges are, and you can actually hover over those points and actually see the addresses. You can zoom in to that particular map just by simply scrolling in. So if we kind of scroll into the Seattle area here, you can actually see which colleges are where within there. So, and then you can actually, I mean, clicking on it, it won't do you anything, but if you had actually set up some other data, that would actually filter the other data, in this case, to that specific college. I just didn't set that up, but it just kind of shows how those filters are working, because it actually is showing the count moving to 1 as it should when I click that one to filter by it. So just a quick little, here's how you can, in a few minutes, set up a report and actually get it to show some data. Is kind of the idea. Once you know what data you're looking for, and you go out and you pull it all into your report. Man, now it's going to do this again. Well, you guys are getting a really good view of all my desktops, aren't you? All right, so some of the other stuff I'll talk about as far as getting into some of the coding and stuff that's going on. You've kind of heard us mention some of these. There are actually 2 different languages that are being used within Power BI Desktop, unfortunately. I think it came from the fact that as they built these within, for those of you that don't know the history, 4+ years ago, before Power BI itself existed, is there were a bunch of these separate add-ons within Excel that you could download for free. There was a Power Map, there was Power View, there was Power Query, and there was Power Pivot. Those 4 tools became the basis of what we see today for Power BI Desktop, merged together into one tool. So as each of those were developed, they unfortunately came up with their own languages over time. So you will see that there is kind of that needing to a certain extent know both, which is also the other reason I haven't focused myself on learning Power Query to be able to just code it, flat out, because DAX is the far more language I use far more than needing to worry about actually coding M or Power Query. So that's kind of the decision you'll have to make within your company is, are you going to learn both? Are you just going to learn one? Whichever one you want to do, because they both kind of have, as you can see from the underneath each one, they have some overlap as far as what they can do. Power Query really isn't a good language for creating calculations and stuff. It's not meant to be a calculation language. It's meant more as a data manipulation type language, or if you've heard the term ETL or ELT, that's kind of where Power Query excels. And it's also really good at actually being able to connect to all these different data sources, as we saw, as far as all the different things Power BI can connect to. And in fact, because it can connect to so much stuff, it's actually showing up in more products. Now Microsoft has included it. It's built into Excel now, so if you go into the newer versions of Excel, it actually has the same Get Data button that Power BI Desktop has, because they just basically took the same code that the Power BI team wrote and just put it right into Excel now. And then that's actually also showing up if you're using any of the newer Azure technologies with Data Factory. They have what they call wrangling data flows. I think it's by far one of the worst names they've come up with, but we won't get into that. But it's that technology is actually basically Power Query running in the web is what that is. So that's kind of interesting that they're actually taking it in that direction now as well. But then DAX, as I mentioned, is kind of the bigger language when you start getting into Power BI Desktop. This is the more of if you did Excel, lots of stuff in Excel with doing lookups and all that kind of stuff within Excel to actually code in there. That's very similar to that language. So if you're familiar with that language, you'll find DAX pretty easy to pick up. But it's got a lot more capabilities built into it than what Excel does with some of its functions. But that's kind of the big thing about DAX, and DAX is still changing. So they are, in fact, this last month, I think they added 2 or 3 new capabilities to DAX. So Microsoft is continuing to extend DAX as time goes on with newer functions and actually making stuff run faster within the language as well. But it's a language I would focus on if I had to choose one over the other. Is that DAX is a far more useful language when it comes to what you can do with it in Power Query and or in Power BI. And like I said, Power Query is kind of written for you pretty much all the time when you are doing stuff within Power BI desktop. So there's not a huge need to actually sit there and actually learn how M or Power Query works, at least in my experience. All right, so we kind of saw already some of that prototyping stuff as far as building out the report. It was, as easy as if you ever watch Christian Wade's stuff, clicky, clicky, draggy, draggy, droppy, droppy type stuff. That's kind of the terms he likes to use for Power BI desktop, and that's kind of the stuff you can do with it is pretty easy and fast to build as far as all the different visuals that are available within Power BI desktop. So just some tips here before we finish off that, one of the things to keep in mind, as I mentioned before, is that all of these models within Power BI, they are tabular models on the back end. So what you are doing is actually loading any of the data that's in those models is actually being put up into memory within the system, so keep that in mind. There are 2 versions usually of the Power BI desktop application, a 32-bit and a 64-bit that are available. So if you are still running an older computer that only supports a 32-bit version, just keep in mind that limits you to the typical limit of whatever it was, 2 gigabytes or whatever that you could use in memory at any one time. So that's something that you have to keep in mind for these kind of models. Once you get to that level, the model's no longer going to run. You won't be able to even use it in Power BI desktop. So that's something to watch out for on the machine. And then when you're deploying this to the server, the same thing comes into play, even within deploying this to the Power BI service. So keep that in mind with the amount of data. What I will offer you is the good news is the tabular models are set up to do columnar compression. The idea with that is that it allows you to compress the data down from 10 to 1 is kind of the typical ratio they quote on it. So it does a pretty good job of compressing things down, because since it's doing it by the column, you can think that in your data set you probably, especially if you have a column that's just yes, no, or true, false, it's compressing that down to 2 values. So you can see how that would save a ton of space. Where you're not going to get a lot of compression, of course, is in like a comments column, because every single comment is going to be, different than the other one, even by, even maybe 1 letter or 1 symbol, whereas all the blanks at least would compress down to nothing, of course, as well. But we typically, I have seen actually even better than 10 to 1 compression with the data that we have. So, kind of going to vary from company to company, but typically you do get a really good compression ratio out of the data. So the other thing to keep in mind that was something I stumbled on for a long time with tabular models, because I came from a world of using multidimensional models more than tabular, because that's been around a lot longer, is that when you're actually doing stuff with the tabular model, you think about it as that everything it's doing is actually trying to filter down those tables to less and less data. The idea being that since it's all in memory, you want to get it to where it's actually having the least amount of data available to it to show, the results of that. So it's not a typical type of setup where it's actually, just trying to get to that one particular cell in the data that you're asking for. It's first going to try to narrow down the amount of data in each of those tables to get to that faster. And it's doing that all within RAM. So that's why typically tabular models are a lot quicker and they work really well with Power BI Desktop as far as you being able to click a filter and it immediately appears to be showing results because it's doing all that within memory. And I mentioned before, make sure you refresh your data. If you're using the import or the dual mode with your data sets, just make sure they're actually fully refreshed. That's always a cause of concern, is that somebody's saying, well, I see 5 and I see 10. Well, who's refreshed when? Make sure that all the refreshing is in sync so that you don't run into those problems. And with that, setting it up, if you've deployed it to the Power BI service, take advantage of the scheduled refresh capabilities that are built into the service. And then there's also, if you're using Power BI Premium and stuff, you can do stuff like incremental refreshes as well. If your data set is too big or takes too long to do a regular refresh on, you can do an incremental refresh where you tell it where the date time field is, and it'll be smart enough then to say, okay, I'm only going to grab the data that's new or changed since the last time I did it using that date time field. So there are those kind of capabilities built into Power BI now as well. And then once you have published to powerbi.com, you can actually share those data sets now. That's something that's been a newer feature they've put out. If you've heard about shared data sets, that's kind of what that idea is, that once you've published one of these models, reports, up to powerbi.com, it actually makes it so then it's available to other reports to actually reference it directly. So you don't have to feel like you've got to bring in the same data set, over and over individually in each report. If it's going to use exactly the same data that you already built a report for, you can just go into the get data and say, I want to use a Power BI data set that's already out there, and it'll just pull that whole model in. So at that point, you really can't, that'll be the situation where you won't be able to actually change the relationships, because then you're actually doing a live connect to that model. So you would have to do any changes to the model would have to be done in that source data set that you actually built first. But with the caveat that if you are starting to then share those across different reports, any change you make to that base one will affect all the other reports that use that as a shared data set. So you can get into kind of a strange situation where you changed it for one report and you broke another one, unfortunately. So that's something you got to watch out for. Excuse me, what was that? She's asking if you have to update your desktop to get that feature. Yeah, at the very least, you have to update to, gosh, I'm trying to think when they rolled that out. It was earlier this year, so I think if you go back to August, September, maybe July, I can't remember when exactly it was put into play, but it's there. And then the other thing that may come into play as well is depending on what kind of level of Power BI you're on. So to do shared data sets, you have to be a Power BI Pro licensed user, and then you would have to have rights to at least read that data set within Power BI. Otherwise, it doesn't show up in the list when you go to select them. Okay. Oh, okay, you're asking as an admin. No, so the Power BI admin can actually disable the share of cross the entire tenant of being able to do that. But that's universal pretty much across all of the data sets, all of the workspaces that you create within your Power BI instance. So by default, it's on for everybody, but as an admin, you can turn it off if you do want to prevent that from happening. Okay, yeah, so if you don't see it in desktop as an option, it shows up as a, what you should actually see. I bring up Power BI Desktop and you go to Get Data, one of the options, if you scroll, actually I'm going to look at it for, where's it at, Power Platform, I bet, yeah, there it is. So if you go to the Power Platform now, you see Power BI Data Sets. That's actually the capability to actually see that within desktop to connect to it. And once you connect to it, it actually just goes and connects to your Power BI service, and shows you, it does give you a warning about this being a live connection, but then it will sign in as you, assuming you're all signed in already into your Power BI instance, which this is using my local one, or my instance, which doesn't have a heck of a lot of data sets on it, so it may not come up since I've got it paused right now. But yeah, the idea being it would pop up a dialog that would then show you all of the data sets you have access to within Power BI to use as a data set. And I guess I'll also mention that I kind of said it multiple times that the Tabular Engine is running behind the scenes on all of this. So all these tools and things you learn, the nice thing is they all work across all these different technologies. So they'll work in Power BI Desktop, on PowerBI.com. They're also now in Excel. It's actually going to be in probably other tools coming up. They're starting to roll it out into a bunch of places because it's a way of showing a lot of data in a very small footprint as well. So it's not like these tools with DAX and Power Query and all that stuff are only usable within Power BI. It's actually going to be usable in a lot of different places within the Microsoft ecosphere. And then there's stuff that's not even within Microsoft's setup that's actually going to work with it as well. So it's something that I think is a skill that does have a lot of payoff to learn. And with that, I can move into Q&A. I'll switch this over real quick, so just in case, but there's the contact info for that. But yeah, we've got, 4 minutes? So I did pretty good there. Go ahead.
So, thinking of architecting Power BI solutions, if you're not already using AS Tabular, is there a point to including maybe an Azure AS into your solution since it's already kind of AS Tabular?
Right. Yeah, so he's asking about, should you consider possibly using what I think they call a enterprise model, basically, instead of building it within the Power BI desktop. Is that kind of what you're thinking? Right.
What's the point? It's already tabular. Why would you spin up another AS?
Yeah. Right. So yeah, he's just kind of, why would you do all these different tabular things? And it boils down to more, what do you need your users to be able to do within Power BI? For us specifically at my company, we've decided we want that enterprise model set up. So we do have an Azure AS instance that we run, and actually 95% or so of the reports that we build in Power BI just live connect to that Azure AS model. So that makes it kind of limited for the users, because if they connect to our model, they then can't go out and connect to a web source, because that gets locked out because it's a live query connection. As soon as you do that type of connection, Power BI Desktop locks down and you don't even get those other two options that we saw on the left nav, because you're connecting to an already defined model. So that's one way of preventing them from, creating a whole bunch of Power BI reports doing the same thing basically in their reports. But yeah, there's the other side of the model that we've actually started to run into, is our end users have started to build some more ad hoc stuff where they want to take the data that's in our Azure AS model and add some stuff to it. And so you can still do that too, because when you go to connect to the Azure AS model, you can actually specify an MDX or a DAX query, and then that no longer becomes a live query, it's more of a direct query setup, and then they can actually go and join in other sources to join with it, which we can't specifically prevent. They would have to have the knowledge of how to write the MDX or the DAX to do that. The thing that concerns me a lot is the ability to just create, all these data sets, and they all just live out there on the service and start eating up resources. And that's kind of just considered the side effect, basically, of making it an ad hoc user reporting environment that you just have to kind of manage hope that you train your users enough to say, if you're really building a report, please start with our model. If it doesn't do what you need to do, talk to us and stuff as far as the IT team and see where to go from there. But we try to push people towards, our enterprise model just because of, you have 5 people that do the same exact thing in 5 different reports and probably could get 5 separate numbers. You're right back to the same problem of nobody gets the same numbers anymore because they didn't do the relationships the same way that somebody else did. So, it's always a challenge, but that's kind of, Microsoft leaves that up to us as IT or as admins to try to figure out what's the best way to do that. And some of that's also being fixed with some of the governance stuff that you may have seen they're doing, where they're actually making it now where you can actually go into a data set in Power BI and tag it as promoted as a user. So that allows it to bubble up to the top of the Power BI data sets that are shown in those drop-down lists. And then IT itself can actually go in and say a promoted data set or any other data set is certified, and that's considered to be the highest level of promotion you can do, and those show up at the very top. So then the idea with that is that data set, IT has basically said, this is the one everybody should use. And so it helps with the visibility at least, so that somebody doesn't just jump into a new report and just, do their own thing is kind of the idea. But unfortunately, there's no tool to stop them from doing that. That's kind of, once you've put Power BI out there, that's kind of what just happens organically with the tool. Anyone else? All right, well, I'll stick around afterwards if you've got any other questions. Otherwise, hope you had a good past summit, and see you, most of you, hopefully at least in Houston next year, where it's going to be. So we're moving cities.